Hi, this is Jennifer Story. I am the Special Education Program Improvement Coordinator in the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. This is a walkthrough of our Disproportionality Workbook, which districts who are identified as having disproportionality or significant disproportionality are required to complete and submit to OSPI no later than May 1st. The very first tab that it opens to is called the Instructions tab. You can see all of the tabs of the workbook along the bottom. We're going to walk through each of those workbook tabs, and you can also link to them from this Instructions tab. Each of these is a link to that particular worksheet, and we're going to walk through all of those. We're also going to be having some office hours scheduled in September, some open office hours. So if you or your team have questions and would like to get on with us and talk through your data or any questions that you have, feel free to join us in those open Q&A sessions. So on the Instructions tab, we've got the layout of basically the workbook. So it tells you each tab. So the Designations tab is the first tab. You can click right on this and it will take you to that worksheet in the workbook. You can click to go back to the instructions and it'll take you right back to where you started. So this first worksheet is just basically a map of the workbook and walks you through each of the tabs and what they contain. And again, each one of these is a link that will take you directly to that tab. The very first main worksheet is actually the most important worksheet in the workbook, and that is the Designations tab. The reason it's important is that it will tell you if you have disproportionality or significant disproportionality, and will tell you how to find your data. It'll tell you where that you in the workbook that you need to address that particular area of disproportionality. So there are some instructions at the top, but basically all you're going to do is enter your county district number into the yellow box. So every district in the state, or LEA, local educational agency, every LEA in the state has a 5-digit county district number. And if you're not sure of what your number is, there's a little button up here that says see the list of county district numbers. If you click on that, it'll take you to the alphabetical list of all the LEAs in the state and tell you what their 5-digit county district number is. And then again, you have links to go back to the Designations tab and to the instructions. So back to the Designations tab, I'm going to enter a sample district's county district number in, using Seattle as our example. The very top of the worksheet will tell the LEA if you're required to complete and submit the workbook. And if so, the due date is right here, as soon as possible, but no later than May 1st of 2024. The instructions are to complete it and email it to our WISM email address. If you are required to complete the workbook, the next line will tell you which of the worksheets you're required to complete. So there are 4 primary worksheets, and they are down here numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this will tell you that this particular district is required to complete worksheets 1, 2, and 4. Worksheet 3 is an optional tab. It's actually the plan for implementing coordinated early intervening services, or CEIS, which is a voluntary activity that we'll talk about when we get to that worksheet. But if your district is not designated as significant disproportionality, then using your funds, some of your funds for CEIS is an optional activity. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to that particular worksheet. So when you go down, the layout of this Designations tab is it'll start by showing you the different areas of disproportionality. So does this LEA have disproportionality? And this section is talking mostly about discipline and identification. So this district does have disproportionality with either discipline or identification. And then it will give the LEA a summary of what their disproportionality is. So the first 2 sections are discipline, And for disproportionality, this is specific to out-of-school suspensions of more than 10 days for students with IEPs, which is indicator 4A, and indicator 4B, which looks at the same discipline rates, but breaks it down by race ethnicity. So this particular LEA does not have any identified disproportionality with regard to out-of-school suspensions of more than 10 days. If they did have disproportionality, this section right here would tell which groups were experiencing disproportionality within the LEA. In order to see the definitions of discipline that we're looking at, what are we looking at? Where are we getting the data from? What is the definition of disproportionality? What is the formula, the actual calculation that is used? You can click on any of these and it will take you directly to that particular tab and will tell you how, for example, indicator 4A and 4B were calculated. What is the indicator? What is the data source? How do we calculate it? What is the actual formula? And then what is our definition of disproportionality? So any of those on this designations tab, any of those links will take you directly to that particular section of the definitions to give you more information. This district does have some disproportionality with regard to identification. This is tied to indicators 9 and 10. Indicator 9 is looking at students identified in special education by race and ethnicity. Indicator 10 is breaking that down by specific disability categories. So this particular district has some disproportionality, has met the definition of disproportionality, which is a risk ratio of 2.0 or higher for 3 years in a row. For 3 years in a row for the same category. So for this district, it's for students who are identified as American Indian and are found eligible under all disability categories. There's also disproportionality with regard to these specific racial ethnic groups for the identified disability categories of intellectual disability and specific learning disability. So it's a really quick summary. The next column tells the LEA where to address the disproportionality that is identified. So for American Indian all disabilities and these specific disability categories, the district is going to be addressing the disproportionality on worksheet 1, sections 1 and 2, which are questions 1 through 6, and also worksheet 2, section B, questions 1 through 3. So that's where the district will be addressing disproportionality with identification. In addition, if the district has met the first year of the definition of significant disproportionality, so in our state, significant disproportionality is a risk ratio of 3.0 or greater for 3 consecutive years. So if the district has reached 1 or 2 years of being over 3.0 for any group, for any category, then there will be an identification here to let the district know that they have hit the first or second year, and they are required to address that initial significant disproportionality in an attempt to ensure that it does not reach 3 consecutive years. Because once it does reach the 3rd year, then the district will be identified as having significant disproportionality. So this district has a couple areas of discipline that have hit the first year of being over 3.0. And so that is something the district is going to address on these sections. Finally, the last column over here is showing you how to get to your data, how to actually see what your risk ratios are, what your N sizes are. You can actually click here and it will take you to the tab where it will, where you can type in your county district number. And what's important to remember is once you've typed in your county district number, you need to click off of the cell and wait up to 20, maybe even more, 20 seconds or so for your district's data to populate. As soon as your name pops up here, then that means your data is showing on the sheet. So right now we're looking at disproportionality indicators 4, 9, and 10. So discipline and identification. There's also a significant disproportionality tab that shows your data with regard to significant disproportionality, because the calculations are a little bit different for both of those. So on both of these sheets, there will be color coding. So red is something you really want to be watching for. Anything that is red has met the definition, has met the threshold of significant disproportionality, which is a risk ratio of 3.0 or higher. Anything that is orange or yellow has met our definition of disproportionality, but has not yet reached significant. And anything that is blue is overrepresentation that has not yet met the threshold for disproportionality or significant disproportionality. So there's a little bit of information here about what you're going to see on this sheet. It starts off with a summary. So we're starting to look at indicators 9 and 10. We're looking at identification. And again, this is a summary of what the district is designated as having disproportionality for which areas. And then it will show the district's data. So for example, this particular district, it has met the definition of disproportionality, which is 2.0 or greater for 3 years in a row. And for students who are identified as American Indian or Alaska Native. So it says yes here, the risk ratio is above 2.0 for 3 consecutive years. So just scrolling down, one thing to remember is with risk ratios, you're really looking for anything that's over a 1.0. 1.0 means that that particular group has the same chance of being identified in that category as students from all the other race ethnicity groups. When you start to see numbers that are over 2.0, that means that those students in that group are more than 2 times more likely to be identified as being in need of special education as students from all of the other race ethnicity groups. Numbers that are under 1.0 are underrepresentation. So, for example, in this data sheet that we're looking at, students who are Asian are a little bit more than half as likely to be identified as having a disability as all other students combined. So underrepresentation is something to be looking at, especially when you're looking at what is it within your system that is contributing to one group being over-identified and another group being under-identified. So you're not required to address underrepresentation, but it's always something that's helpful when you're looking at your data. So again, when you're scrolling down and looking through, the items that are in red are the ones that have met the definition of significant disproportionality over 3.0 for 3 years in a row. So again, everything is color coded and can give you some more information about those data that feed into that designations tab. And then this will link you right back to the designations. So we looked at the first half of the designations tab. The second half of the tab is looking at significant disproportionality. So there are a lot of different areas of significant disproportionality. Again, if you click on any of these, it'll take you to the definition, the calculation, the formula, everything you want to know about that particular area. You can just click here and it'll take you. This tells the district if they have significant disproportionality, which again is 3.0 or greater for 3 years in a row. And if so, for which identified groups. So students who are Black or African American identified as having an intellectual disability, for example. These are the worksheets where you're going to address this particular area of disproportionality. And then to see the district's significant disproportionality data, you can click here. So those are the designations tab. Now let's talk about the 4 worksheets. So we saw at the top of this tab that this particular district is going to be doing worksheets 1, 2, and 4. Worksheet 1, when you click there, it will already have your LEA's name there. It will tell you if you have to do this worksheet or not. And then it will also tell you which sections of the worksheet you have to do, because you only have to do sections of the worksheet that are related to your area of disproportionality. So for example, if you are identified as having disproportionality with identification, you're going to be required to complete the child find and referral and evaluation and eligibility sections of this worksheet, but not the other sections, which are related to placement and discipline. This district, however, is also identified as having some discipline disproportionality. So they're going to be addressing that area. They're not going to need to be addressing placement. So on this particular worksheet, there's a little bit of instructions at the top. Basically, this is a review of your policies, procedures, and practices. This is a federal requirement that any district that has disproportionality or significant disproportionality is reviewing their policies, procedures, and practices to see if any of those are contributing to the disproportionality that you're seeing in your data. So we recommend, and actually we expect the LEA to include representatives from the identified overrepresented community. So for example, if you are over-identified with regard to students who are American Indian or Alaska Native, you would want to be working with tribal representatives, tribal liaisons, as part of this review that you're doing, to make sure that you're involving the community in your review of policies, procedures, and practices. You want to identify the dates of review. The dates need to happen after July 1st of 2023 because they need to be related to the current designation and the current areas that are overrepresented in the data. Each section has 3 questions. It starts off by telling you some of the different data sources that you can look at to help you look at this section. The actual regulatory requirements are listed here. So if you hover, you can see the federal regulation that is applicable to this section. You can see the WAC, our Washington Administrative Code, or state regulation that is related to this area. So these are the areas that you're looking at within your policies, procedures, and practices. These are some of the data sources that you can use to look at those areas and to be able to answer these 3 questions. Each section has the same 3 questions. You have to be able to say yes to the first 2 questions in each section. The last question in each section can be yes or no, but the first 2 have to be a yes. You have to be able to say, yes, we do have board-approved policies and procedures for child find and referral. All LEAs are required to have that. Has the LEA conducted a review of its policies, procedures, and practices related to those areas? You have to be able to say yes, because that's a requirement when you've got disproportionality or significant disproportionality. If you haven't completed the review yet, then you can't finish the workbook until you complete the review. The last question is whether you made any revisions as a result of your comprehensive review. That can be a yes or a no. If you do say yes, that you did make some revisions, then you need to go respond to questions 15 and 16. So I'll show you what those are in just a second. So the second section is evaluation and eligibility. We've got a section on placement, and we've got a section on discipline. Those are all of the areas that are identified in the definition of disproportionality and significant disproportionality. Every district is required to complete section 13, and that's the names and titles of individuals participating in the review of your policies, procedures, and practices. It should not be done by a single individual. It should be a team. And again, we say here, we expect the LEA to include representatives from the identified overrepresented community. So question 14 is something that all districts need to complete. It's giving us a description of how the LEA engaged with the identified community as part of either the review of policies, procedures, and practices, or the completion of worksheet 2, which we're going to talk about next. So that's what you'd add here, a brief narrative. And then remember that questions 15 and 16 only have to be completed if you said yes to the 3rd question in any of the sections. Did you make a revision to your policies, procedures, and practices? as a result of this review. If you say yes, then you need to explain here, briefly describe what the revisions were. And if the revisions were to your board-approved special education policies or procedures. For many districts, if you're using the WASDA numbering system, that would be procedure 2161P. If you made any changes to that specifically as a result of this review, then you need to submit a copy of those to OSPI so that we can have them on file here. So this is to identify the date that those were submitted and the name of the person that submitted. Every district with disproportionality has to complete worksheets 1 and 2. So worksheet 2 is your LEA action plan. Again, we start off with some brief instructions at the top. And it will again tell you, is this district required to complete worksheet 2? And then again, you're only completing those areas in which you have disproportionality or significant disproportionality. So it will tell you if you have to complete the discipline section, which is the first section. And if so, what areas of discipline are you addressing? So for this particular district, they are looking at discipline rates for students who are identified as Black or African American. This means in-school suspensions less than 10 days, out-of-school suspensions more than 10 days, and total disciplinary removals. The questions in each section are the same. The first question is to take a look at your data and to identify what are the factors or potential root causes within your district's system that may be impacting the data. What is contributing to the disproportionality that you're seeing in your data? And it's very important to remember that you're looking at factors within your system. You're not looking at factors within the community. So you're not looking at whether there's poverty in the community, or you have a lot of students transferring in, or your district is predominantly Hispanic or predominantly Native American population. You're really looking at what is it within your system, because that you have control over. The things that are going on in your system are what you can identify in your workbook for activities and addressing. So we want you to be looking within your system, not externally. And then describe for us, the second question is to describe for us the activities for improving performance based on the information identified above. So what did you complete? What did you identify as your priorities for completing disproportionality and addressing the root causes that you've identified, those factors you've identified within your system? If you had to complete a workbook last year, then you can identify for us a description. Please include a description of any changes that were made and the impact of the activities described in last year's plan. The last section is if you identified any data reporting errors. So if you noticed any reporting errors in the data that you're seeing, please let us know and include a description of how you're going to ensure that all errors are corrected and accurate data are reported in the future. So again, you're only completing those areas related to the areas identified as having disproportionality. So if you are designated as being significantly disproportionate, you are required to implement coordinated early intervening services, and we're going to talk about that next. But worksheet 3 is for voluntary use. So this doesn't have to be tied to disproportionality, but it is a good way of addressing disproportionality. Districts can voluntarily choose to use up to 15% of their federal IDEA funds to provide coordinated early intervening services, or CEIS, to students who are not eligible for special education. So this is giving districts the flexibility to use up to 15% of your special education funds to provide additional interventions as part of your MTSS system to help students who need additional supports, additional academic and behavioral supports in order to be successful. And again, this is for students who are not eligible for special education. If you choose to use some of your funds for this, there is a link to allowable expenditures. So there's a list here of all the different things that you can use your funds for. So there's a lot of options for how to use those funds. The same thing for mandatory CCEIS. They're all the different options are available there. Before you start implementing CEIS, you need to have your plan submitted to OSPI and approved. It's not a very lengthy plan. You're just going to be letting us know, are you going to use up to 15%? You need to tell us what areas you're going to be doing CEIS related to. What are your interventions? What is your professional development? What additional supports are you providing to your students in what areas? If you're working on specific grade levels or specific schools, you would identify those here. And then any additional comments or information you would like us to know. The actual plan is in table format. So you're basically telling us what is the activity. So for example, you're going to hire a behavioral coach or part of an FTE of a behavioral coach to provide some additional interventions to tier 2 students as part of your behavior MTSS system. You need to break that out by the type of cost. So for example, salary is going to be this amount of money. The coaching, 20 hours of coaching will cost this much. Professional development will cost this much, and materials will cost this much. And then it will total it all up for you. So you're going to enter the amount of money, and then it will total the costs for you. And then it will be the total at the bottom. And it's just a reminder here that the total in this particular cell cannot exceed the total amount, the 15% of the district's LEA fund. So it's taking a look at the district's current LEA application for the maximum allowable amount. There are some data and fiscal and student data reporting requirements. It's basically just telling us how many students received CEIS and then tracking those students for the next 2 years to see if they have an evaluation that finds them eligible for special education. And then every year that you implement CEIS, you just need to be able to track those expenditures and upload a transaction recap to show us how you spent the funds. So we recommend you have a separate account code within your system so that you can track that. If you're interested in beginning to implement CEIS on a voluntary basis, we are more than happy to help you with this. Please let us know. You can email our WISM email address, the same one that you're submitting the workbook to, and we're happy to help you. Districts that have met the definition of significant disproportionality, which is a 3.0 risk ratio or higher for 3 years in a row, they are required to use the full 15% of their federal funds to provide comprehensive CEIS or CCEIS. So this is the planning form for completing CCEIS. So basically, you'll be submitting this plan by May 1st. Districts that have had significant disproportionality for multiple years have already worked with OSPI and have a separate plan in a different format. They are welcome to continue to use that format for completing their plans, or they could choose to use the format in this workbook. It's up to them. So it'll tell you if the district is required to complete this plan. This is more comprehensive than a voluntary CEIS plan because this is specifically tied to addressing the disproportionality, the significant disproportionality that was identified in the data. So the district will put a team together. They'll work on a root cause analysis. They'll describe the CCEIS activities, the professional development related to those activities, the targeted schools, entrance and exit criteria for serving students in CCEIS, how they're going to evaluate the outcomes, and then what are the budget allocations and activities. And then there are similar fiscal and student reporting requirements. Districts that are identified as having significant disproportionality receive additional supports from our office. Our fiscal and program staff will meet with the district on at least a quarterly basis to support the district in working through the different areas of this plan, identifying root causes, identifying activities, and how to spend your funds. So we will be working with you if you're identified as having significant disproportionality. A couple last tabs. We've already looked at the allowable expenditures tab. Again, that's for voluntary or mandatory CEIS or CCEIS. We also have a technical assistance resources tab that's divided into 4 sections. So understanding the requirements related to disproportionality and significant disproportionality are the resources in kind of orangey color. The yellow are identifying how to identify potential root causes. Green is understanding CEIS and CCEIS. And the blue is developing, implementing, and reporting CEIS and CCEIS. So similar to other things, you can click on it and it will take you right to that section of the resources. And then you can go back to the top by clicking on back to the top of this tab. We've already taken a look at this tab, but this again is the tab that shows you all the different definitions, calculations for all of the indicators and all of the areas of significant disproportionality. What is the actual formula? So you can take a look at your child count. It's telling you exactly where the data are coming from, what the year is, and the report that was pulled from. And then finally, we've got the CCDDD tab. So that's the Disproportionality Workbook in a nutshell. And again, our office is more than happy to walk through anything with you. You could join our open office hours in September. Or we can schedule an individual Zoom with you and your team if you have questions about your data or want to talk through anything further. We are happy to help. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you this year.